Okay, so we have a lot of ground to cover. If I talk too fast, just wave at me and I'll slow down a little bit, but there's an awful lot of information to cover in the next 45 minutes. So welcome to 45 tests in 45 minutes. I'm Michael Greenberg. I'm the head of strategy, sales, and marketing for Hedgehog, so that's how I remember what company I work for. That's my email address. If you want a copy of this afterwards, happy to send it to you. There are a couple things I need to take out before I can send it out, but I'd be happy to share the deck. So quick question, how many developers in the room on the technology side? All right, marketers / business folks in the room? Okay, sorry you guys, this is mostly for the developers, just so you got, because really, a lot of this is about understanding what those few people in the room are gonna ask most of you in the room over the next year. So, a little bit about us, just real briefly. Hedgehog, most of you know us for TDS and our developer products. Those came out of our services work, so we've been around for a decade. We work with a lot of pretty good-sized companies. We're not a huge company, but we're really focused on Sitecore. It's pretty much, going after the difficult stuff is our specialty for the most part. Okay, so let's get going. So, does any of this look familiar to you guys? Delivering tailored experiences is not as hard as you think. Just get started. Starting to look familiar? Perfection is within reach. Am I scaring you yet? Do the right thing at the right time, okay? So for all the developers in the room, understand that marketers were promised this, right? Everybody that you serve, that you work with on the marketing side, on the business side, they've been promised A/B testing, they've been promised personalization, okay? Especially with Sitecore 9 coming, for those of you who haven't migrated yet or haven't really done an upgrade yet, there's a lot of capabilities in there that your marketers are going to start asking you for the kinds of things that they're used to in other systems. So you really need to start thinking about variation, variability. How do I handle tests? How do I iterate things? How do I do this in a very rapid, sort of agile way? But just a quick refresher for those of you who may not be familiar with it, value per visit, right? The concept of engagement value is really what the cornerstone of making this whole system work, right? It's one of the approaches that you can do within Sitecore. I'm sure all of you have played with it. Some of you have implemented it. You actually use it actively. But ultimately, it's a way to model out expected value. So expected value essentially is percent likelihood times dollar value or euro value to come up with an expected value for a particular action. So if a page that has 1% of the people who visit ultimately turn into a $100 customer, the expected value of that visit essentially is $1. And I know I'm using American currency, forgive me. But look at a form, for say, that has a 5% conversion rate, ultimately at $200 per visit, has an expected value of $10, right? So that allows you to start scaling expected value based on, engagement value based on the expected value. Now it's a little more complicated than that, as most of you who have done it know, because there's engagement value is additive. It's not a true analog, but it starts giving you the understanding of how to build out this pyramid for the amount of value for activities, okay? But this idea of value per visit, right, it's built into Sitecore. I'm sure you guys have used it. Hopefully your marketing users have used it. It's the way you really understand, what kind of value is going on and how do I optimize for my particular audience. So here's another example within Sitecore Analytics, as you may know. It's looking at value per visit for internal keywords in search, right? Very, very valuable to understand, what's the differences in value per visit for a variety of terms in search within Sitecore. So based on that context, you can start doing really interesting things, right? You can start maximizing value per visit. You can look at how does it impact conversion rate? How can I test things and compare on an apples-to-apples basis what types of things work, okay? Now, this looks good, but the reality is this is actually a poorly designed analysis. It's really not a good test, right? Because it's actually two different pages, slightly different layouts. One has a picture, one doesn't. So as you start doing investigations, start building tests into the system, you want to really be thinking about how do I minimize the variability so that I can really learn from version A versus version B. With me so far? Okay. So as you start thinking about testing, okay, you need to think about it two ways. You need to think about refinement, which is how most people think about the world, right? How do I get better and better and improve, versus exploration, right? Exploration is testing as well. You need to be thinking about what are the ways that I can try to find solutions that aren't necessarily directly related to the things that we're doing today. So, it may take 5 or 6 or 7 different areas to test from an exploration perspective to find a solution that actually outperforms your starting point. So, as I go through and into the test scenarios that we're talking about, you'll see a lot that are in the, do I have this particular assumption right? Have I thought about this thing in the right way? Versus on the refinement side, does A or B work better? So your marketers and your business people will be thinking about these things and coming to you to figure out, how can I test this? How can I set up an experiment effectively so I actually know when the results come back that I can make a change to my business and move on to the next thing. So we kind of bucket tests into 3 different sizes: large, medium, small. Klein, middle, gross, right? So the big ones are the ones that ultimately challenge your core assumptions, probably require some development. They may lack obvious data. They probably run across different systems. So these are the ones you have to think about the most. Medium takes more work, potentially has some large impacts, and small are the things you can do quickly, right? What most of you probably think about as tests in PsyCore is primarily the small stuff. Does this image work better than that image? Does this copy work better than that copy? Does this component work better than that component? So those are small things, and we'll kind of touch on those at the end. What I'm trying to do for today is to start thinking about some of the things that you really should be thinking about when it comes to testing and how to make the platform work much, much better than it does today, right? Remember, PsyCore, the marketing is out there. We're promising marketers, perfection, speed, all the capabilities that PsyCore promises. With 9, they're going to want it today. All right, so with that, let's start with the large size tests. All right, so I've got to cover 45 in about 40 minutes, so I'm going to go really, really fast. So slow me down if I talk too fast, but hopefully you'll be able to kind of get a sense of where I'm going with this. And obviously, since I'll share the deck afterwards, you can always get in and look at something a little more as we go through. So let's start with number 1. Does page speed matter, right? So as you start thinking about tests, so you start thinking about your site, does it matter? Can I start testing for whether or not page speed makes a difference in my site? Does it improve my search results? Does it actually improve conversion? Do I have a lower bounce rate? So just start thinking about, okay, how can I test that? Because it's very expensive to put in all the work that's necessary to get page speed improvements maybe across the board. But you can pick a couple pages, figure out what it takes, see what kind of benefit you get, extrapolate the costs, and come back to the marketing team and say, look, yes, it matters, or no, it doesn't matter, right? So one of the important things to understand is that Google is going to tell you that of course page speed matters, right? If you're more than 2 seconds, then you guys are idiots. So you need to figure out how to get down below 2 seconds. Well, the reality is every company is different, right? Every situation is different. So it may not matter for you, but you won't know until you get in and actually start testing. Number 2, does mobile first matter, right? So if I'm designing for mobile and I'm biasing that against desktop, does that make a difference, right? Is it better, is it worse? I don't know. You have to go in and test to find out. Design for mobile, change your designs, maybe reiterate them, do large-scale tests in terms of what the design looks like. Try to figure out, for your marketers, is mobile first the right way to go, or maybe I should just stick with desktop since that's where most of my visitors are, and we're doing a good enough job on doing responsive sites that we can handle it from a mobile perspective. But one of the ways to test that is to do full homepage version tests, right? So, I kind of cheated a little bit, didn't change the hero image here, but ultimately start putting up different styles of things, different versions of things against each other. See which one works. Again, may not make a difference for your company, but makes a total difference for your company as you start testing these things, because these are what your marketers are going to want to see. Different personas. So is the plastics buyer persona right? I don't know. How about the plastics user persona? Which one's better, which one's right? I don't know. I need to test, right? You want to get in and see and look and say, for example, the content needs of these 2 personas are basically the same. I need materials information, I need a good search, but the reality is the persona goals are different. One needs to figure out how to spend $100 million on plastic. The other has to figure out how to actually use it from an experimentation and research perspective. So you want to be thinking about how to test different personas or different definitions of personas against each other, again, using value per visit as a way to evaluate that to see which one works better. Segmentation, segments. We could spend a whole conference, in fact there are entire conferences just focused on this, but you need to be thinking about what segment definitions am I using, given the information that I have within my database. As Salesforce connectors become more common, as XConnect starts opening up the database and opening up XDB for more information, your segmentation capabilities are going to start expanding, right? The facets at your disposal, you start using machine learning to score customers, score users. You're going to have vastly more options when it comes to segmentation. So this is definitely something you want to test as well. Okay, so first off, pretend that left one is a mobile notification, because it's not actually native, at least in the SUGCON 9 version that I have. But you want to start thinking about, given everything else being the same, how do I start testing what channel makes sense given my personas, right? So one of the things I noticed, for example, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but there doesn't appear to be, for example, a random A/B split in Sitecore marketing automation today. So as a developer, that's the first thing you're going to want to build, right? Build a custom listener that essentially does random splits on the marketing campaigns so that you can try two different things and see which one works out better. So a lot of the ones I'm going through here make an assumption that you've built an A/B split, like a random splitter that you can use for marketing campaigns. So in this case, all I'm going to do is test email versus notification. Which one works better? I don't know. Maybe email works better for corporate buyers and notifications work better for consumers. Those are the things you just have to test to find out for real. Another one, number 7. Does accessibility help or hurt? So as I design and build for the WCAG accessibility standards, is that actually hurting my value per visit, right? In the case for us, this is off of our website, just as a good example, we have a high contrast mode. So you can see this in a way that makes the text much higher contrast, meets the AA standard for accessibility. Does that help or does that hurt, or does it do nothing? Those are things you should be testing, especially as you start thinking about, do I need to get to AA standard, do we need to get to AAA standard, or is A good enough based on the laws in my particular country? You don't really know, and you don't really know whether to extend to a more advanced standard without testing to see which one works better. Does more personalization help or hurt, right? So, I don't know, does it? If I personalize 3 things on a page, is that better than doing 1? Or, I just don't know. I need to test to find out. One of the nice things, though, that, in this case, I'm using the Sitecore demo environment, the Habitat environment, which is you're going to start seeing a lot more of. This is based on some personalization that's actually in the base case that you would get from Sitecore demo. I actually had to blow this up so you can see it. By doing 3 variables or with 12 versions, I have actually 50 different cases. So at 4 pages a day, it would take me 13 years to test. So not exactly a good use of personalization. So you need to be thinking about those things as the marketers are working with you guys to try to enable stuff. But this is the kind of stuff you have to start learning. Sitecore's story is built around personalization, and it's very strong and it's very powerful, but you may not necessarily want to overdo it and put too much on a page. But again, you don't know until you test. Does my design help or hurt? And unfortunately, you can't see this that well, but when we designed our website, we had this clever idea of being kind of out-of-the-box thinkers, so our text would sort of spill over the edges of boxes and over graphics as a kind of a nod to being out-of-the-box thinkers. I don't know, it doesn't really work very well. It doesn't really come across that well. So is that actually hurting us? Because it makes it look like we don't know how to write copy for our own website. But again, those are things you can test, right? I should have put the video of this, but we have JavaScript that sort of moves a bunch of things around the page. It looks kind of cool, right? So it sort of builds like, all the boxes sort of move together. But that adds page weight, it adds load time, it makes it a little more difficult from an accessibility standard. Does it actually hurt us, right? Test that, figure it out. Go in and take a look. And these are the kind of things that as a marketer, I'd go back to my development team and say, okay guys, I don't know if this is actually helping us. Let's start testing versions without JavaScript, see if it works better, look at value per visit and see if it improves. Number 11, is a long page better, right? So I took this from someone, I don't remember who, I can't give them credit, but basically they took an original page, redesigned it to be 6 times longer, and had a 52% better response rate. That might work for you. Maybe it won't, but again, that's another thing you want to try testing. Test a long page versus a short page. So now we'll start getting into maybe some of the more detailed stuff, right? The number of items in a navigation. Is 4 right? Is 8 right? You want to try this out. I mean, even though probably most of you have gone through a lot of information architecture and design to kind of come up with the perfect navigation bar, the reality is you don't really know. Test 5 versus 4, test 6 versus 5, test 4 versus 3, see what kind of results you get, right? Those are the kind of things that, as a marketer, I'm going to start asking for. I'm already bugging my guys because I think that 4 is probably not enough, and in the right one, 8's probably too many. So I want to start testing this one against the other. So the labels themselves also are something you want to test, right? So if you've been on the Sitecore website, you know that there's a lot of labeling in the navigation bars at Sitecore. Those are all things that they can and should and will be testing, right? Are the labels correct? If I use different words, you know, will I have a better click-through rate? Will I have more value per visit? Those are all things you absolutely want to be testing. The order, right? The order in which I've done nav. You know, for those of you who know, or you guys won't know, but for TDS, most of our business for people who actually buy on the site come pretty much straight through and purchase. There's not a lot of browsing before people buy. So maybe licensing should be first. I want to try that out and see, does that work better? Since that's actually what most people click through when they want to buy things. Or maybe help should be first, because a lot of our traffic is customer support for TDS. Or maybe it's contact us. These are all things we should be testing and trying and starting to iterate through to see which one works best. So, number 15, the number of items in your second level nav, right? Should it be 3? Should it be 4? Should it be 2? I don't know. Test it, right? And again, this is what the whole movement now is towards sort of this test in place, this iterate in place approach. And this is what your marketers will be asking you for if they're not already. Oops. Mobile navigation. So, you know, you may have built in mobile nav based on your responsive site, but maybe you need a completely alternative navigation to improve there, right? So these are all things you should be thinking about. You know, the left one is the habitat demo from Sitecore. You know, essentially in a narrow frame, has all the information from their normal navigation, but you know, potentially they could test a variety of different versions of that to see which one will work out better. Mobile versus desktop layout, right? Again, something you absolutely want to be thinking about to not necessarily follow the same rules about one versus the other, but test which ones work better. So in this case, where it basically keeps the same design, again, this is in the Sitecore demo, you know, versus this one, which has a kind of a left justified sort of cut off the image design. So which one works better? I don't know. Test them out. See which one wins. Number 18, a regular nav versus super nav, right? Anybody use super navs like this? Yes, no, couple? You know what? Sometimes they really work well, but sometimes they don't. It's worth a test. It's worth a try. Gets a lot more information into a smaller amount of space. It's a good thing to give a try. Number 19, search results. So, you know, there's a huge spectrum that you can be testing from a search results perspective. You know, I used the Coveo site just as an example of kind of, you know, what's the most advanced kind of approach when it comes to search results. You know, contrasting that with the Habitat demo website, which has a very straightforward and simple approach. But these are all things you could be testing and should be thinking about because your marketer is going to come ask you for it. All right, so let's move to medium-sized tests. Number of form fields, right? Sitecore forms, right? It's not with them, so you have a much more ability to kind of go in, play with it, test it, and so forth. You know, how many fields you have, pretty much everybody knows has an impact on conversion rates. But you should, again, test it out. Maybe 4 is right for Sitecore in this particular case. You know, maybe I don't need job title. Maybe I don't need region because I need the CAPTCHA and I need the disclaimer at the bottom. These are all things that are absolutely worth testing. Where the form goes on a page, right? This is a big one. We have a lot of tendency to sort of dump forms at the bottom. But as we see in the hospitality space, you have to get things that people fill out up on the top of the page. So try that out. Move your forms to the top. Give it a test. See what it looks like. So quick sidebar. The idea of kind of understanding where your forms are on a page and how whether people actually see them or not, you can learn a lot very quickly if you start looking at scroll depth. So how many people track scroll depth today? A couple? Super easy. If you have Google Tag Manager installed, you can do it in a relatively short period of time. But you can learn, for example, that only, I think it's 28% of the users on this particular page that we were looking at scroll at all, right? So 72% see the top, that's it. And then only of that number, something like 4% make it all the way to the bottom of the page. It can tell you a tremendous amount about how people are actually engaging with pages, especially ones that have forms on them, whether they're actually even getting down to and seeing the form at all or not. So 22, stepped versus long forms. So one of the nice things in SiteCore, of course, is that you can do a save action every time there's a step in a form and save that data. So even if somebody doesn't make it until the end, you're still getting some information on that customer. So as you step through, and again, this is from the SiteCore demo, I get to the end, I have search results. The question becomes, if I had done that as one long page versus multiple steps on a page, which would perform better? Test it. Use value per visit, figure out if the long form approach actually turns out to work better than a multi-step form approach. I know which one probably will win, but again, some companies that may not be the same. Number 23, form field guidance. So, do I have boxes that people fill in? Do I have underlines that people fill in? Which one is more natural for my user base? Which one does a better job at actually filling out forms? Test it, give it a try. Combine this with the number of fields, the actual UX around this. You may find that your assumptions have been wrong all along. Test it and find out. Number 24. So, hopefully this one should be pretty obvious to everybody. Who do you include in a campaign, right? It's never cut and dry. How broad is the audience? How narrow is the audience? Do I maybe take a larger audience and split it into multiple segments to see if some assumptions are right, some assumptions are wrong? We absolutely, especially as you start now doing marketing automation, is don't set it up once and assume that it's right, that it's okay. You want to definitely go in and rethink all of your assumptions about that campaign over and over again to keep testing for better results. So, did anybody go to the MedTouch presentation yesterday? Anyone make it to that? Okay, it was sort of like, yeah, of course you did because you did it. That it was about real-world journeys and how you sort of iterate the journey, you iterate the information, like take a small one and optimize that. This is in that exact same sort of area where you want to continuously test, continuously iterate. Think very from like an agile perspective in terms of how to improve these things, and then keep going, keep trying, keep going, keep testing. You're never going to stop. You're always going to be out there testing over and over again. How long you delay between campaign messages. If somebody signs on the form, do you email them immediately? When's your follow-up? Is it a day later? Is it a week later? Is it 2 days later? Which one is best, right? As you get into marketing automation, that's the kind of stuff you have to test all the time. You have no idea. You're just guessing at first, right? 3 days might be great. Sounds good. But the reality is 2 days might be better, or for some segments, 5 days might be better. 26. So campaign message content. Again, if any of you have worked in the email world, you know that testing testing content is key to getting email to be productive. You'll have to, assuming you use EXM or some sort of offboard email, building into these campaigns, you're going to see those kinds of iterations happening all the time. This stuff tests, you got to just get in the habit, get in the context of changing it all the time. In an ideal world, you make it possible so that your teams can do it themselves. You're not stuck having to do all the coding behind the scenes every time you want to test things. Enable it. Let the team have at it. Do 100 tests, do 1,000 tests, whatever it takes to start learning what works and what doesn't. So 27, dynamic versus static landing pages. It's one of those things where, is it better to create a landing page for every campaign, keep it static, keep it simple, or do I create a few templates of landing pages, make them personalized, so that they sort of adjust based on the inbound traffic, right? I don't know. I'm not sure which one's going to work best. In this particular case, it worked out pretty well. We had a campaign, I think it's a little bit later, that as people came in where you personalized the homepage based on which campaign they came in on, we basically doubled the response rate if you showed golf instead of showing snow or surfing. So, but again, it's gonna be different for every company. Give it a try. Try static, try dynamic, try personalization. You have to balance how much work it takes to set up all the static landing pages, versus the potential performance hit that you get on dynamic pages. So 28, and this is actually the campaign that drove the prior slide. So what is the value proposition on your landing pages? Test it. This is one of the most important areas you can test. Is find a tee time the right message? Is 20% off nightly rates the right message? And you have to be thinking, even though my corporate team says I absolutely have to put the book now in the header, the reality is, does it actually decrease value per visit by having another call to action on the page that might confuse people? In fact, there's a fourth one, right? Join the loyalty program. So now you've really, really given people a whole bunch of different things to look at. Maybe simplifying, doing a much fewer number of calls to action on the landing page is what it will take, but just test it. Do A/B tests against these designs. Component types. So, I don't know, how many components do I put on a page? What types do I put on the page? This is actually the top and bottom half of the SUGCON demo homepage. Have I made a mistake by putting duplications of 2 of the components on the page? Would it make more sense to have 6 different components just so I have different visual aspects of the page? Absolutely something you want to be able to test. The order on the page. So again, this is the whole page, stacked top to bottom. Should I really have clients above services? Should I maybe take the form and put it higher on the page? Is travel personalization more important than SXA? These are all, that order, even if I don't change the components themselves, the order that I put them in can make a huge difference in terms of the value per visit. So, inline calls to action. So this is a call to action inside a much longer page. Give those a try. That might actually perform better than putting a form at the bottom of the page by doing inlines along the way. How big are they, right? This is the one off the TDS page. It's kind of huge, right? It performs meh, not so good, but maybe it would be better if I had something that was that big, right? So maybe you do 5 different components, 5 different heights. Test all of them against each other, see which one performs. I, as a marketer, this is what I want. So I think none of my devs are in the room, but I always harass them because this is one of the things I want to be testing and I haven't been able to yet. 33, gated versus ungated content. So this is actually an interesting example. It's Sitecore and those evil people whose names begin with an A. It's actually, they're giving away the exact same report. Sitecore has it gated through a form. The evil empire has it where you can just click in and download the report. Two different ways of approaching the exact same problem. But my guess is that the value per visit because of the captured form fill out is so high that it's worth the lower amount of traffic that actually goes all the way through. But I'm sure both companies have tested this extensively to figure out which one is better for them. 34, so nav versus no nav in landing pages. So that same example was also interesting because there's no navigation on the page. When you land on it, that's all there is. There's only one thing you can do, which is read the report. So another test for landing pages, is my navigation getting in the way? Do I make it so that people, once they land on a page, they can't go anywhere except the one action I've put in front of them? Definitely worth a test. Schema markup, so schema tags. If you haven't started doing this yet, it's worth checking out. This is a way I can improve the way that people see my navigation. It's a way I can mark locations using schema markup so it's easier for Google to figure out that a location is actually a location. Again, something else to test. You can get into it pretty easily. You can try 1 or 2 pages before you build out the entire site or build out everything using schema markup because it can be a lot of work. Anybody doing that today? Nobody? Okay, you got to try it. Especially for search. Just you can make this one little change, just kind of making your navigation depth much more visible, makes a pretty big difference in click-through rates. So If you do nothing else, just do that, and it's worth spending 45 minutes in here. So, and the scroll depth one. That one is actually really valuable too. All right, small tests. These are the things you guys are probably used to hearing, right? Should the button on the page be blue or purple? I don't know. I'll try them both, see which one works, right? Blue, purple, white, black, yellow, red. You know, they're all worth testing, but you may find that, you know, one particular approach works best for you. You know, how big should it be? It's kind of a small button and the text is really small. You know, maybe it should be like that big, right? Another really easy thing to test. Your marketer's gonna want it. The design guys will be unhappy because they like the nice little box that was the right size. But since the marketers have to perform and actually deliver numbers, this is what they're gonna want. 38, so the actual offer, right? Learn more, come on. Who clicks on a learn more, right? But it should be something more interesting, like shop now or build the perfect home or find your TV, right? You wanna be testing that kind of language because I guarantee that whatever your first inclination is for the call to action, it's gonna be wrong, right? So, you know, you wanna iterate and try different things and see which ones drive the best value per visit. 39, so placement. Where does the button go, right? Again, we're doing the small test here. These are the easy things. Does it go there? Maybe in the center of the page, I'll get a better result. You know, or maybe on the right side, it'll be better there. You know, this guy's kind of squinty, so maybe I'll cover up his face and I'll put the button there. You know what? I bet you that performs better than anything else, but actually that button will probably perform the best. So again, experiment, try, iterate, test. This is the kind of stuff your team wants from you today. So enable as much of this variability as you can to make it possible for them. Copy length. So we could talk about copy again all day. I think we're in a world where copy is a lot less important. It's good, you know, write it the right way, but you know, we could also spend an entire session just talking about variation in copy. But a couple of things that are probably worth experimenting with, you know, is it too long? Is that too wordy? Is something shorter and punchier going to perform better than something that's long? It may hurt you on an SEO perspective, but it may help you on a value per visit perspective. Complexity. So those boxes basically are saying the same thing, right? What TDS does from a complex perspective versus an easy perspective. So the Flesch-Kincaid test, do you guys know what that is? It's a way of evaluating how complex a sentence is based on the number of syllables and the number of words in the sentence. So there are some places, for example, that have requirements for the simplicity in the writing that's based on the Flesch-Kincaid test. So you may want to test, you know, different complexity levels in your writing. You may find out, for example, that you've been writing everything way too complicated, right? Way too many multiple syllable words. It's not simple enough. People just aren't scanning it. They're not reading it. They don't see it. So if you go something that's a lot simpler, okay, it doesn't work too well. You know, a 61 on the reading ease scale versus a 0 on the reading ease scale, you may see an increase in your conversion. Absolutely something you want to be testing. So 42. You know, the voice and the style of what you're saying can make a big difference as well, right? You may be professional versus friendly or use a very techie voice. You know, obviously we don't use the second voice, right? If you don't use TDS, your project's gonna fail, you're gonna get fired, and be homeless within 3 weeks, right? That's not language we use on the website, obviously. But, you know, it's an extreme example of using different voices on the site and see if maybe the approach you've been taking up to this point doesn't resonate as well with your visitors. So 43, last on the copy, I promise. You know, maybe bullets are better than prose. Maybe lists are better than prose. Try it out. You know, I basically took the first 3 steps of this and extracted really what they were saying, which is choose an assistant, select a location, and then control a bunch of stuff, right? But I told that whole story without having to parse through 120 words on the site. You know, think about it that way. Maybe taking a more visual approach like this is the better way to approach it. And then the last 2 are the obvious ones, right? Images. So, you know, there's dozens and dozens of different factors that you can test on images, right? Just looking at, if you've gone into Getty Images and seen what your marketers are going through to find images for the site, you know, they have to sort through, you know, dozens of different facets of what this image is actually all about, right? So the chances of them picking the absolute perfect image every time is 0, right? Pick a bunch, test them against each other, see how they work. And then 45, again, the most obvious thing, right? Componentry. So this is the standard components for one of our clients, just as an example, but maybe I need to make them taller or shorter, or 2 wide versus 1 wide, or image left and image right, or image center. Like, these are all things that obviously you want to test as well. The amount of padding top and bottom. One of our websites, we have too much padding. It looks like we made a huge mistake because we have all this white space between sections. So I know most designers love white space. I hate white space. It's just a waste of, I'm wasting space, right? So I want to try it with a lot less padding and see if it performs better. But I, as a marketer, that's what I'm asking for. Give me the ability to try different padding, and that's it. That's all I'm going to ask for first, right? So all the things I've asked for today, that's the first thing I want. But the other 44.99 requests are all things I want as well. Took a lot less than 45 minutes, didn't it? So, questions, comments. You have like 9 minutes. You can ask me anything. Yeah. I'll send you a copy of this. Just send me an email address. We have a question over here. Perfect.
So my question is about exploration versus refinement.
Okay.
How do you decide what percentage you go explore or refine? Because in an e-commerce setup, exploration can be really expensive.
Correct.
But there may be a pot of gold at the end of the tunnel, but maybe there isn't one. And yeah.
So e-commerce to me is a special case, right? Because all the user experience context in e-commerce is typically 10 years ahead of everybody else. We've already been through most of the iteration cycles and most of the exploration cycles. So the percentage in e-com would probably be much more heavy in sort of the refinement versus the exploration piece. It's still worth carving some budget out to try new things because there's always going to be something new that you didn't know about. Whereas I think outside of e-com, the dividing line shifts to a lot farther over. So you want to do a lot more exploration because chances are you haven't really explored what the possibilities would be. Your designers gave you one design and you implemented the design, and that's what you've had for the last year, right? You have no idea if, a completely different approach might be vastly better than what we have today.
Okay, and I have one other question.
Of course.
About self-learning and AI. So instead of defining all the tests, maybe you can just give it a goal to optimize something, and then the AI can test all kinds of variations themselves, and maybe that will lead to a better output. Then some stuff you think up beforehand. So maybe you have some experience with that.
So I was expecting that to be the first question, not the second question. The big problem with AI is that you need a lot of data to train, right? Your problem has to be extremely well defined, and your parameters typically have to be relatively narrow, right? So AI is awesome for picking images, right? It's really good at figuring out what's the right image based on a particular audience, right? It's not very good at necessarily, let's go back a little farther. When you start getting into like the questions that you're asking yourself, right? Is a long page better than a short page? AI is not going to tell you that, right? Unless you found someone who can randomly test all of your length options with all the componentry that you have with enough volume to be able to do a statistically significant test across all those, you're not going to get to that point through this process, right? Eventually AI will replace this. I have no doubt about that, but we're not there yet, right? We still have a ways to go. AI is good at a fairly small number of things, but that's why I wanted to kind of give you a broad spectrum of things to think about, because trying to figure out page speed is probably not something you're going to have an AI to be able to test CDN versus not CDN, expire header versions. Those are all things that you probably don't have something in place yet to be able to test that. In 2 or 3 years, very well could be, but we're not there yet. You know, if you build for variability now, and you can support the kind of tests that people are asking for, when an ML type solution comes in place, you'll be much, much better positioned to have the right data, the analytics already set, you know, all the parameters sort of understood so that you can just drop, you know, an AI API in place and start optimizing that way. Yeah, in 5 years, this presentation would be completely obsolete. I totally expect that, but we're not there yet. Question?
Yes. Wouldn't you consider that a lot of the decisions we were showing the test should be covered by the UX process instead? Especially because in the UX discovery, they will do focus groups, they will do investigations about accessibility. And my second question as well is, following this approach, will it increase the cost of the project itself? Because it sounds like constantly you have to redefine the components.
So to answer your second question, absolutely, it increases cost. But the whole point is that I can also increase revenue while I'm at it, right? So you have to look at both sides of this. By enabling testing and variability, you will ultimately increase the amount of labor that goes into a particular project. But the point is that the benefit you get from that was worth the expense. But that's, so I had to sort of skim past that at the beginning, but that is definitely something you need to be thinking about. If it costs me $500 in labor to do a second component, right? How much incremental revenue do I think I'm going to get on a value per visit basis based on each incremental component build? If I have 100 visitors a day that are worth $1 a piece, it might be a long payback period. But if I have 100,000 visitors a day that are worth up to $5 each, suddenly that $5 investment to have a second option would make total sense. But getting back to your first question, isn't this UX? Isn't this front end, right? Yeah, a lot of it is, but at the same time, the configurability, for example, of a component, right? Can I configure the padding? Can I configure the height? Can I configure left side, right side? Can I configure the font? Can I configure the heading level depending on where it goes on the page? You know, those are things that typically start to fall into the back end, right? You have to think about how much complexity do I build into my components versus a very simple, you know, standard size that I can't test and I can't configure.
My question was directed because if it's an inception of a new project, will you say in that case you will advise to decrease the budget of the UX discovery because eventually it has to be retested entirely again?
Yeah.
Kind of contradict
you got to
the
start
way
somewhere,
that things
right?
work in digital agencies, unfortunately.
Yes, but I mean, like, for example, think about information architecture, right? So, you know, both the navigational structure as well as the page structure, right? You want to put some thought into that, but you don't need to spend a huge amount of time getting it exactly right, right? Because you want to have a really good starting point that makes sense based on the objectives of the project. But instead of spending 4 weeks on IA, you might spend 2.5 weeks on IA. Have a really good option for some of the most basic stuff, and then start testing it. See which, and you may find, in fact, I guarantee you will find that whatever you did first isn't going to perform as well as something else. Now, that is a bit of a change, and there's probably no IA people in the room. So, you know, we're finding, for example, that we use less IA than we did 2-3 years ago for that exact reason.
Okay, last question.
That was quick.
You said something initially about testing personas and segments. Can you say a little bit more about, I mean, how you do that? Because you said it's based on value. And if you assume that you're doing this in an early stage where your site is not fully optimized yet to kind of gaining that value, wouldn't that kind of create a circular reference, if you know what I mean?
You can't do it at the beginning.
Exactly.
So you need to start collecting information to have things to be able to test against. So, you know, when we think about personas, what we generally say is pick one. It's probably wrong, but at least it'll be close, right? Start collecting the data, understand, you know, just what kind of events seem to matter, what data seems to matter, what type of content seems to matter, and then iterate. Because I also guarantee your engagement values will also be wrong, right? So usually stage 1 is start collecting data. Stage 2 is put engagement values in. Stage 3 is go back and actually build the scaling that's appropriate. Then you can really start to use value per visit properly. So yeah, I mean, you won't start testing personas on day one. That's you can't. So there's a lot of other things you can be testing while the data is being collected as you go. Yeah, I didn't talk time frame on any of this stuff. So there's a different time frame for everything. So again, if you have other questions, call-outs, have an issue with anything I said, agreed with stuff that I said, happy to hear from you. That's my email address and my Twitter address. Love to chat with you guys. This is what we do pretty much all day, every day. It's all we really think about. So
yeah, thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much.